I have known Carreira Ching for over 10 years. As an undergraduate at the University of Hawaii, he enrolled in my nonfiction prose course in the fall of 2007, and later I conducted a directed reading with him devoted to the study of graphic memoirs. Everybody should write a comic. He did very well in my course in the directed reading, and I knew he was very interested in creative writing. Nothing, however, could have prepared me for the laser-like force he brought to his fiction when he entered our graduate program in the fall of 2011. He was already becoming productive as a writer, with 3 prose pieces in print, 2 of them in Bamboo Ridge, both early drafts of sections that would eventually become part of his 2015 novel, Between Sky and Sea. He had also read at the Hawaii Book and Music Festival and at the annual major fundraiser for Bamboo Ridge Press. And that September, he would be part of the highly successful MIA series. I mentioned the readings because one of the striking aspects of Donald Carreira Ching's commitment to writing is his support of and participation in public literary events. From the very beginning, he recognized the importance of contributing to the writing community that creates the readers for his writing. While pursuing his MA with a creative writing emphasis, he was publishing, reading, and receiving awards for his work. 7 fiction pieces appeared in print, 1 in the greatly missed Honolulu Weekly, and 1 as the winner of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser Halloween Fiction Contest in 2012. His 2013 entry was published as a runner-up. These pieces demonstrated his ability to write compelling fiction for the general public. 3 more pieces were featured in Bamboo Ridge, including Traditions, the recipient of the Editor's Choice Award for Best Prose, which appeared in the 100th issue. In keeping with his commitment to Hawaii's writing community, he also participated in 9 readings and workshops. His performance in our MA Creative Writing program was outstanding. In his final semester, he won the Patsy Sumi Saiki Award for Fiction, the most substantial award granted to writing devoted to a Hawaii subject. Finally, on the basis of his work at university, he was selected for the Ian McMillan Award, granted in memory of that prolific author and outstanding mentor of Hawaii writers for over 40 years. Since his graduation, he has published more prose pieces, nonfiction works, and poems in such venues as Hawaii Review, Chaminade Literary Review, Hawaii Pacific Review, Bamboo Ridge, the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, Abstract Magazine, Rockland, and Summit Magazine. He has also given 17 readings, 8 in relation to the appearance of his novel. These achievements in themselves would make him a viable candidate for the Cades Award. He has been very visibly and quickly emerging since 2009. But the centerpiece of his accomplishments is his novel, Between Sky and Sea, A Family's Struggle, published by Bamboo Ridge Press in December of 2015. The frequency of his publications might suggest that he works quickly, then moves on. With regard to this remarkable novel, nothing could be further from the truth. As a reader of various drafts over the years, I saw just how much effort he devoted to this sub-project. Although I read a full-length draft before he graduated, he very astutely decided not to submit the entire novel as his MA thesis, but to work intensively with his advisors on a substantial section of it. Drowning Roots, a novella, was enthusiastically received by his committee. He then spent 2 years revising the larger manuscript for publication, circulating drafts among his supportive readers, and working extremely closely with the editors of Bamboo Ridge, who had expressed interest in publishing the novel some time earlier. It is fair to say, then, that Between Sky and Sea was the product of intense energy, but also deliberate and highly effective revision. The promotional blurb I wrote for it highlights its principal strengths. By binding us tightly to 3 brothers occupying very different, sharply invoked spaces in Hawaii, Between Sky and Sea shows us much more than a family's struggle. As we feel the pressures that shape each of these young men, we also come to recognize the relations between people and place, between parents and children, and between desire and duty, that make Donald Carreira Ching's first novel a study in intimacy and a vivid, full-length portrait of contemporary Hawaii. A careful, passionate, and memorable book. Anyone who has lived in Hawaii for some time will instantly recognize just how accurate and heartfelt this novel is. the care taken with the language, capturing the specific tones and phrases for each of the characters, and the close observation of locations. How exactly, for instance, the mountains and the valleys feel different from the shore make this novel powerfully evocative of Hawaii. The exploration of political and cultural conflicts is incisive and thought-provoking as well. But it is the realization of those characters that is most impressive. The three brothers themselves are highly distinct and memorable, but together they form a composite portrait of how young Hawaiian men search for different ways to navigate their histories and the challenges of contemporary urban Hawaii life. The relations between generations are portrayed through vivid and often heartbreaking scenes of conflict, confusion, and love. Finally, Between Sky and Sea is an important novel by a writer who is not only emerging himself, but is part of an emerging generation of younger writers who are building on the achievements of their teachers and role models to create a contemporary literature of Hawaii. Donald Carreira Ching is an excellent choice for the 2017 Elliot Cades Award for Literature for an Emerging Artist. His work shows great promise and relates to Hawaii in expansive and intimate ways. Between Sky and Sea is a substantial contribution to Hawaii literature, and we can certainly all look forward to what emerges next. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Donald Carreira Ching.
Thank you so much, Craig. Sorry, let me just adjust this. Thank you to the Hawaii Literary Arts Council for this honor, as well as for the important work that you do for Hawaii's literary community. I also want to say thank you to Craig Howes for that amazing introduction, as well as all of that you've taught me, the encouragement you provided, all the years that you've shared and supported me. I also want to thank my wife, who is my first editor, and who, without her love and support, this novel would not have happened, as well as her insight with every draft, every conversation, every anxiety-filled submission. Thank you. As well as to all of you guys for taking the time out to allow me to share my story with you folks and to supporting literary arts in Hawaii. Is the volume okay? Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna read two pieces today. I was told we got a strict time limit, so I'm gonna try to stick to that time limit. And I chose two pieces. I wanted to kind of show maybe like an earlier piece that I had written and then an excerpt from my novel. Because I spent I would say about 7 years working on this novel. And during that time, as I was working on the manuscript, I would sometimes, in an effort maybe to explore a character, explore a situation, I would write another story, and that would become something else entirely. And so I kind of had this constellation of pieces that all sprung up from the novel. And I also want to read this piece, and this one was published in Bamboo Ridge issue 100, because I think I only read it once, and it's a really personal piece for me, and it's about a memory that I have from childhood growing up in Kalu, and it's called What Was. When I was growing up, there was a woman going door to door, asking all the kids in my neighborhood to take a survey. $50, if you can believe it, and all you had to do was fill out a form. She asked me how old I was, where I was born, what my parents did for a living, all things I was then. The topic changed quickly, and soon she started to ask what I knew about Special K, Oxy, Pakalolo. The valley had just begun rallying to rid itself of something we were finding out had claimed more than anyone knew, more than anyone could know. I was probably 12 then. What'd I care about this shit anyway? Just give me the $50 and move along. 5 minutes later, she did. Even in high school, it was more about weed than anything else. A neighbor up the road gave me rides to school in his Hamajang red Integra, the W2 making the trunk rattle as we swerved in and out of traffic on days we were late, trying to make it in 5 minutes flat, only to cut out of class anyway. He would smoke occasionally, never heavy, while I shot Southern Comfort in the back roads near Kapunahala. Weed was weed. You could get high and still laugh at chronics like our friend Mike, telling us about seeing the world in different colors while he loaded himself with painkillers from his mother's medicine cabinet right outside the gas station where he worked. A few years later, I started to hear things. The breeze that sweeps through the ko'olaus carries with it whispers that no one dares discuss, and that I finally began to put together. It still wasn't your son, your daughter, it was theirs. It was the neighbor who paces back and forth in his house, yelling at the birds he keeps locked away in cages so filthy the smell spills out onto the street. It was the guy from high school, you know the one, good guy, played football, real akamai. For real? You sure? What can be? And when you saw him that first time, even if he looked the same, you saw him in the light of 1,000 stories, countless news breaks and special editions, his picture in the same paper that lined the cages, shitted on daily, and suddenly no one wants to knock on his door and ask him even once where he's from or what his parents did for a living. When news vans pull up, they don't ask if everything is all right, how he got this way, who he was before. ICE in capital letters, pictures of termite-ridden homes and carports overgrown with weeds, a toothless male in the background, now like a mongoose, afraid of the rats behind the lens. The same rats that took the valley so many years ago and that have now come with their cameras to record what development has done. He says nothing to the reporter, looks as if in mourning, afraid to speak about this thing that has taken not just sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, children stillborn, their blood a clear mix of generations, of culture, but himself. Growing up in Kahalu for me was about the windward rains that ran through her valleys and fed the rivers I'd catch crayfish in as a child. It was about walking with my friends down to the bus stop and catching the 65 to Temple Valley and then down to the pier where my father would be pulling in with whatever he did or didn't catch. But the same rains that find their way to the ocean bring with them a deeper sense of something that has long since been polluted by tar and concrete. The chronics in the paper are not nameless. They have just forgotten their names, unable to remember on shores now eroded with time. Nowadays, these same shores, once viable, once vital like the Akipua'a in which they are a part, are documented with single-word captions and images of mongoose scurrying for the shade. I was too young then to understand, or maybe I was just too ignorant to see that what Mike was doing was waiting to die beside those pumps. The Integra that I rode in smelled sticky sweet, and even though I hadn't taken a single hit then, I might as well have taken the lighter and lit it for him. Others too shamed to admit what once was now pray for what is and what is yet to be. Growing up in Kahalu for me, for many, was never about ice. So when the woman with her degree and her $50 asked me what I knew about meth, what was I supposed to say? 5 minutes later, she too would be gone. Thank you. And so the second piece I want to read is from my novel, and it's a favorite section of mine. And with my novel, as Craig Howes provided in his introduction, it's about the story of three brothers and their struggle to find themselves as individuals as well as a family among many conflicts, many pressures, many complications of growing up in contemporary Hawaii, colonialism, cost of living and modernization of Hawaii, as well as drug addiction, which is really the central conflict. And it's the oldest brother, Kaeo's addiction to meth that really causes the family to spiral. And for Mark, who's always grown up in the shadow of his older brother, this leads to a lot of animosity, because in the wake of Kaeo abandoning his family after a riff with them and then the rumors of his drug addiction, he has to kind of hold everything up. The mother starts to get depressed, suffering from mental illness. The father starts to also spiral, and he just can't take it anymore, and he decides to leave. And so from this section, I wanted to take you kind of right at that point where he has left, and to show kind of that conflict. And what I really wanted to do with this section, and a lot with Mark, was to show kind of that character on the outside of addiction, and struggling with someone who they do love who's dealing with these types of things, and kind of that individual's journey. Shortly after he moved out, Mark's suspicions about what Kaeo was doing with Junior began to materialize. A run-in with a classmate at the drugstore, a conversation with a neighbor at the mall, a random text message from a friend. All seemed innocent at first. How's your brother doing? He's still in school. Where's he working now? But there was always an underlying concern that made its way to the surface. I seen him down by the hygienic store. He seemed real out of it. He stay hanging out with Junior Boy a lot, yeah? You know good, you know. Mark kept the rumors to himself, but eventually the talk found its way to his parents anyway. the messages on their answering machine eating away at their memory of their son. Through it all, Pops remained optimistic, encouraging Mark to do the same. But no longer at home, Mark had grown tired of his father's delusions, and though he did his best to humor his father, he knew that it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. And then they did. Mark was in his second month of freedom. He had stopped by the house to pick up the rest of his belongings. He found his father in the kitchen, praying over a sink full of dishwater. "Sorry," Mark apologized. "I never mean to interrupt." "Not at all," Pop said, making the sign of the cross. Mark noticed the glass rooster at the back of the sink. Pops had always been just as much Portuguese as he was Christian, believing in even the most bizarre of miracles, including stories of roosters intervening on behalf of dead men. "He wasn't dead yet," Pops would always interject. "You really think that going help?" "Can't hurt," Pops replied. Mark kept his opinion to himself. "I just get one more box, then I'm gonna go." Pops nodded. "I have something for you. Figured, maybe if you have time." He walked past Mark and headed down the hall. Mark followed into his bedroom. "Where Ma stay?" Mark asked. He walked over to his father's desk and noticed an open notebook near the phone, the cover folded back, messages scribbled in his father's shorthand. "Out with Auntie Cheryl," Pops told him, walking over to the side of the bed to pick up a thin pamphlet. He offered it to Mark. "Ma's doing better, you know. She started seeing someone. It's been good for her," he added. "Good for all of us." Mark had heard about the therapist from Elani, but his brother didn't offer much in the way of developments. "What is this?" Mark said, opening the accordion fold that his father had handed him. He read the headings: understanding addiction, tips for parents and families, who to call, who can help. "You gotta be kidding me, right?" "Whatever is going on with your brother," Pops began, "you need to know," Mark said, quickly handing the pamphlet back to his father. "I don't like hear about how to stay one disease or how you can control what he's doing. This could ill, Pop. You get more brains than that. I told you already." "It's easy to think that, Mark, but it's the exact opposite. Your brother, you know how he is. He has a way of holding things in, and it's those..." Pops picked up the pamphlet. He unfolded it and read from one of the sections. Emotional triggers that can play with his reasoning. And that's on top of, Mark knew that his father still couldn't say it out loud. And with Papa's history, his addiction, Pops substituted. "Why nobody else in this family get one problem then?" "Listen," Pops held his hands up. "I just think..." He searched for the words. "I just wish you'd stop blaming him, Mark. I wish you'd try and take a second to think about him and what he's going through." Mark started to laugh, but Pops pressed forward and tried to understand, that maybe he needs our help. And that although we don't agree with what he's doing, we still have an obligation to try. Mark looked at his father, his eyes bloodshot, pools shaded deeply below them, and a thin layer of stubble gathered across his cheeks like dust. He recognized himself in that face. "You know, Pop, I don't know how many times I wouldn't tell you sorry, for moving out, and I'm still sorry. But no matter how many prayers you say, no matter how many excuses you make for him, none of that going to change what's going on right down the road. You understand that, right? What, you need to catch him coming through the window for believe. He has an addiction, Mark. He's not the addiction. He stayed pathetic. He went through his whole life away. He went through his whole family away. Why can't you see that?" "No," Pops interjected. "You're throwing your family away, Mark. Don't you realize that? I think you've been hanging around the house too long. You know that, Pop? You're starting to sound like Ma. Maybe she's not as crazy as you think," Pops told him. "Maybe," Mark said. "Try ask the therapist next time." Thank you.
Let's hear it again for Don. Okay, I'm here to introduce Tyler McMahon. We all know what happens when you give a mouse a cookie.